So next up we have Clément Moulin-Fuyère with the talk, The Role of Self-Organization Mechanisms in the Emergence of Behavioral Regularity and Diversity. Clément holds a master's degree in both computer science awarded by University Joseph Fourier in Grenoble and cognitive science from Grenoble University Institute of Technology. He got his PhD from the GIPSA lab at the Speech and Cognition Department of Grenoble University. Now he is a researcher at Flowers Group at INRIA in Bordeaux, France. He focuses on grounding artificial intelligence in the origins of human behavior and curiosity-driven multi-agent reinforcement learning. So, thank you again for accepting our invitation, and now we are happy to listen to your talk.
Okay. So yes, thank you very much for the invitation to this great event. So yes, I'm Clément Moulin-Fuyère, and I'm conducting my research in the Flowers team in Bordeaux, in France, at INRIA. And so maybe just a few words about the research group. We are a research group that studies models of open-ended development and learning. And we use these models as tools to help us understand better how children learn, but also to build machines that learn like children, which is what we call developmental artificial intelligence. And so personally, I have been doing research at Flowers first as a postdoc until 2014, and now as a permanent researcher since 2019. And so recently, I have been starting a new research direction in the team, which attempt at integrating our original developmental perspective with an evolutionary and ecological perspective on open-ended skill acquisition in humans and machines. And so in my talk today, I will try to highlight the base principles behind this integrative effort. Let me know if the sound is not super, because I have a new mic and I'm not sure it's great. I can change it if needed. So, but first, yeah, I would like to start by illustrating some of the limitations of the traditional dichotomy between innate and acquired behavior with a video example. So let me introduce you with Acroban, which is a humanoid robot. That was designed in the Flowers Group about a decade ago with the aim to demonstrate how a well-designed body morphology can enable very robust equilibration. And so this robot consists of a bio-inspired spinal column combined with trivially simple local PID controllers and elastics. And so clearly, and actually by design, everything in this robot is pre-programmed with the objective of robust equilibration. But in a live demo in 2009 that we can see here, the robot showed a surprising emergent behavior. A kid started to grasp the robot's hands, and this resulted in the robot spontaneously walking forward, following the kid movements. And this behavior was not pre-programmed, neither it was learned, obviously. It actually just emerged from a change in the environment, which here shifts the center of gravity of the robot and therefore its whole morphological dynamics. And so this example basically illustrates how the dynamics and actually even the function of a purely pre-programmed behavior can spontaneously change depending on the surrounding environmental condition. And this suggests that the dichotomy between innate and learned behavior is far from obvious, in particular because any behavior is a result of many interacting processes that operate at multiple spatiotemporal scales. So they are morphological and cognitive processes, of course, but we can also think of environmental, evolutionary, developmental, or even cultural processes at hand. So for instance, instead of asking if certain behaviors are innate or learned, we can also instead ask how learning evolved, and that is, in which conditions does it provide an evolutionary advantage? And so on this topic, for example, Stephens proposed that learning can only be beneficial for certain trade-offs between predictability and variability in an agent's experience. And he distinguishes two types of experience predictability: within generation predictability and between generation predictability. And so the first column in this table says that when within generation predictability is low, and regardless of between generation predictability, learning is useless because, well, there is simply nothing to learn. The environment is too unpredictable within a generation itself. And on the opposite, if between generation predictability is high, then evolution has no reason to promote learning. Innate behavior genetically passed from generation to generation can basically do the job. And so the interesting case, therefore, seems to be when between generation predictability is low and within generation predictability is high. And so this framework raises the first question: what are the processes just generating experience, predictability or variability within and between generations? And maybe more importantly, how do these processes interact? Then from a developmental perspective, it has been proposed that biological, motor, and cognitive development can be conceived as a complex dynamical system. And a typical example comes from the Waddington epigenetic landscape metaphor, which is illustrated on this figure. So here we can consider the shape of the landscape as the set of environmental and organismal influences on the agent development, and the motion of the ball on the landscape reflects the developing phenotype that changes through time as the ball is rolling. But importantly, even tiny differences on the landscape or the ball properties can lead to quite different developmental trajectories, and each possible trajectory corresponds to an attractor, so that taking one path or another depends on many internal and external processes, so for example, morphological, cognitive, or environmental processes. And so this raises a second question: what behavioral strategies can efficiently deal with the experience unpredictability induced by such a complex dynamical system? Okay, so this leaves us with two main questions, which form the outline of this talk. And so I will start with an evolutionary/ecological perspective, where I will present a preliminary proposition of a framework which aims at understanding what are the processes generating experience unpredictability and how these processes interact at multiple spatiotemporal scales. And then I will switch to a more developmental perspective. I will first present the concept of intrinsic motivation as a strategy that efficiently deal with experience unpredictability. And I will show some computational experiments on developmental machine learning. And finally, I will conclude the talk by an attempt to link the evolutionary and developmental perspective, trying to highlight different ways they can interact together to generate complex behavior. So let's start with an evo-eco perspective about the processes generating experience unpredictability, both between and within generations. So for this aim, we have recently proposed a conceptual framework with my colleague Eleni Missiotti, which aims at fostering connections between research in artificial intelligence and in human behavioral ecology. And so the field of human behavioral ecology, I will abbreviate it by HBE, this is a field that seeks to understand how the behaviors characterizing the human species can be conceived as adaptive responses to major changes in the structure of our ecological niche. And we believe that the two fields can strongly inform each other, and this framework is a preliminary step in this direction. So under the proposed framework, environmental complexity is originally driven by climate variability, which implies instability in the ecological conditions, in particular through changes in resource availability and exposition to predators. And recent hypotheses in paleoclimatology and in human behavioral ecology actually point at a very particular climate dynamics in the Rift Valley at East Africa, approximately 7 million years ago, with complex patterns in climate variability that could have had a strong influence on early human evolution, and in particular in our ability to quickly generalize and extend our behavioral repertoire to changing environments. And whereas there is an analogous tendency in AI toward increased complexity in simulation environments, this is, however, not influenced at all at the moment by existing hypotheses in HBE. And we are currently trying to bridge this gap in our research group. If time allows, I will show some preliminary simulations at the end of the talk. Then, this environmental complexity is supposed to have a strong feed-forward influence on two major phenomena. Firstly, it drives adaptability, both at the evolutionary and developmental timescale, which here again reflects the current trend in AI to couple reinforcement learning methods with evolutionary algorithms. and we'll maybe learn a bit more about this type of bi-level optimization algorithms in the next talk after the break by Sébastien Rizzi. And secondly, varying the level of resource availability and exposition to predators has a strong influence on multi-agent dynamics. And this is through the modulation of cooperation and competition pressures, which in AI is currently mostly studied through the multi-agent reinforcement learning framework and its link to game theory. And so the influence of environmental complexity on adaptability and multi-agent dynamics can then have feedback and feed-forward effects on other components of the system. First, it feedbacks to environmental complexity through the modification of resource availability and predation pressures. And in HBE, this positive feedback loop is sometimes referred as an evolutionary arms race, while in AI, it has sometimes been called autocurricula, which is where an agent's adaptability modifies the fitness landscape of the environment and of the other agents. Second, adaptability and multi-agent dynamics can bootstrap in a feed-forward manner the emergence of more advanced behaviors related to technology, communication, and culture. And this reflects recent contributions in multi-agent reinforcement learning that also study how agents can form a cultural repertoire. For example, discovering tool use, communication, and social norms as the emergent product of multi-agent learning. And finally, under this framework, the emergence of a cultural repertoire feeds back into environmental complexity through the process of cultural niche construction, bootstrapping a positive feedback loop, potentially driving the ever-expanding social complexity of human ecology. And a few contributions in AI have studied such feedback effects, although I believe that much remains to be done in this area. And I will present later in this talk a contribution which we think is an important step in this direction. So the framework I just presented is obviously just a preliminary proposition, but I believe it is of interest for two main reasons. First, because it highlights the links between two different domains that usually don't interact together, namely artificial intelligence and human behavioral ecology. And second, because it can help to understand how processes operating at multiple spatial temporal scale can generate experience predictability and variability through feed-forward and feedback effects. So I will now switch to a more developmental perspective, and I will first present the concept of intrinsic motivation as a strategy to efficiently deal with experience unpredictability. And then I will show two computational experiments showing how intrinsic motivation can spontaneously structure developmental trajectories toward the discovery of communication and the acquisition of an open-ended repertoire of skills. So we have seen in the intro that learning mostly makes sense in environments that are neither too predictable, so that learning has an evolutionary advantage over innateness or pre-programmation, nor too unpredictable, so that there is actually something to learn. So let's imagine you are in a relatively unpredictable environment. For example, you are landing in a totally unknown yet habitable planet. Or more simply, you are just a baby in a room full of toys and other objects. How to efficiently collect informative training data to acquire interesting skills in such complex unknown environments. And one answer from developmental psychology comes from the observation that children spend a lot of time spontaneously exploring their environments. So let's observe it by ourselves. So here is a video of a baby alone in a room, not hungry, not thirsty, no other human interacting with her or with him. So from a rational point of view, one may think that if the evolutionary fitness of this guy is just to grow up and reproduce, then he should probably keep safe. He should avoid putting the fingers in the plug. He should do nothing, basically, just wait for his parents to provide him food when he will become hungry. Yet, as we see here, this is not at all what he does. He goes for the fingers in the plug, he explores his body, tries to grasp, he throws all objects around. And he's not doing it because they are externally imposed tasks, but rather it is driven by different forms of what psychologists call intrinsic motivation and what we may call in everyday language curiosity. So from an evolutionary perspective, just an intrinsic motivation to learn can be explained because it maximizes long-term evolutionary fitness under rapidly changing environmental conditions. And I will precise at the end of the talk how this integrates with the EvoEco conceptual framework I have presented before. So during exploratory play, for example, children invent and pursue their own goal. And that makes them very efficient at solving novel problems with sparse rewards, and also to learn role models or discover open-ended skill repertoires. And there are a number of teams in the world, including our group, which have worked now for a while on modeling these capabilities and studying how they can be transferred in AI. And a general framework we have proposed to computationally model intrinsic motivation in artificial agents is called intrinsically motivated goal exploration processes, IMJEP, which basically refers to all algorithms that loop through the following steps. First, an agent observes the current context of the environment it is in. Let's say, for example, a robot observing objects on the table. Second, the agent autonomously samples a goal in a goal space. For example, it might want to stack the objects together or to place them side by side. Third, it rolls out an an action policy conditioned by the sample goal. For example, moving its body to displace objects on the table. And fourth, it observes the outcome and updates its internal models accordingly, in particular, refining its learn action policies to better achieve the targeted goals. And these four steps repeat indefinitely. So despite the apparent simplicity, these IMJEPs have actually proven to be very powerful at efficiently and robustly discovering how to achieve a wide diversity of self-generated goals in complex environments. And they have been applied to supervised learning problems, for example, for learning forward and inverse models in robotics, also to model child development, for example, vocal control, or more recently to goal condition reinforcement learning agents in AI. And in the following of this talk, I will focus on two computational experiments which both rely on this framework. So the first experiment concerns the self-organization of vocal development. And here we apply an IMJEP to explore the capabilities of a quite original sensory motor system, which is the human vocal tract. So for this aim, we used an articulatory synthesizer, which is a computer model of the human vocal tract able to produce sound waves from vocal articulatory trajectories. So it can, for example, simulate movements of the jaw, the tongue, the lips, the vibration of the vocal folds, and then compute the resulting vocal sound waves. So learning how to control an articulatory synthesizer, or more generally a vocal tract, is actually a classical robotic control problem. How to reach certain auditory targets by executing certain motor commands, which are here articulatory trajectories. And this can be achieved by learning an inverse model, which maps targeted effects in the auditory trajectory space, which is here a 6D space, to motor commands in the articulatory trajectory space, which is here a 18D space. But the issue is that random motor exploration doesn't allow to efficiently learn an inverse model due to the complexity of the articulatory to auditory mapping. And actually, for producing even the most simple vocalization, the agent must finally control its vocal articulators in order to synchronize the vibration of the vocal folds with an adequate opening of the vocal tract. And therefore, randomly generated articulatory trajectories mostly lead to vocal movements where no sound at all is produced. And this obviously doesn't provide informative data for learning an efficient inverse model. And so an efficient strategy to learn inverse models in such complex sensory motor mappings is the one proposed by the IMJEP framework I have previously described. And in this experiment, the agent is sampling auditory goals And the goal condition policy is implemented by the inverse model, which is iteratively learned through experience. So what happens when running an IMJ, which is basically a generic sensory-motor exploration loop, in a simulated model of the human vocal tract? So we showed that it can qualitatively reproduce the first stages of early vocal development observed in most infants. The agent first explores random articulatory movements and therefore mostly produces articulatory trajectories that are not efficient for vocalization, which is what we call no phonician here on the figure. Then it spontaneously discovers how to produce unarticulated vocalization, in which it manages to roughly coordinate the pressure applied to the vocal folds and the opening of the vocal tract, resulting in vowel-like sounds. And so it will focus on so that unarticulated sounds for a while as it is making progress in learning how to achieve them. And finally, the agent spontaneously discovers articulated vocalizations where it can maintain phonation while modulating the opening of its vocal tract through the control of its articulators, which results in proto-syllables analog to canonical babbling in infants, like ba, 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 this kind of sound. So it is important to note here that neither the vocal categories nor the developmental sequence were hard-coded in this experiment. But instead, they emerge from the dynamic interaction between the learning system, the intrinsic motivation system, the body, and the environments, and they all operate in relatively high-dimensional continuous spaces. Then in an extended version of this model, we also showed how this type of goal-directed exploration could account for the late influence of ambient language and vocal productions, but I won't have time to describe it here. So what is interesting in this experiment is that this emerged developmental sequence is actually very aligned with what is observed during the first year of vocal development in infants. And another interesting aspect is that if we run the experiment many times, one observes at the same time strong regularities and diversity in developmental trajectories. For example, some phases and sequences of some phases or some sequence of phases appear very often, but sometimes some phases are reversed, and even some vocal agents have weird developmental trajectories. And all of this with the exact same mechanisms and same parameters, just different random seeds. And this duality between regularities and diversity is also very typical of child development. And in fact, this can be understood as the system being a dynamical system where different developmental trajectories are factors, which is completely in the spirit of the Waddington epigenetic landscape metaphor I have presented in the intro. So the main lesson from this model is that some forms of human language, like for example its phonological and syllabic structure, can emerge from very generic, intrinsically motivated exploration mechanisms and independently of any functional pressure to communicate. And this has two important implications. First, this suggests that in principle, the infant may develop initial speech capabilities without an innate specific bias for learning speech and vocal interaction. And second, we believe that such emergent developmental structures can guide and constrain evolution by constituting a reservoir of behavioral and cognitive innovations that can be later on recruited for functions not yet anticipated, and both at the developmental and the evolutionary scales. So I will now switch to a second computational experiment showing how language, once invented, can be recruited as a powerful cognitive tool that enables compositional imagination and bootstraps open-ended innovation. And so one particular usage of language we have been recently focusing on in the Flowers group is imagination and how the compositional structure of language can be leveraged to generate goals that are out of distribution. So for example, in the previous approach I described, the space in which the agent could sample goals was fixed, and the agent could only sample goals within that predefined space. But to power creative exploration, however, agents will need to generate novel, creative, and abstract goals that are out of distribution of things already seen. And in this process, children use language as a creative tool. So the architecture I'm going to present is actually grounded in key ideas from developmental psychology and linguistic literature. So Piaget first discovered that children use egocentric speech to narrate their ongoing activities. Later, Vygotsky showed that they used it to generate goals and plans to solve them. And language is indeed compositional and creative by nature, as Chomsky illustrated with the extravagant construction, colorless green ideas sleep furiously. So the compositionality of language can be used to generate out-of-distribution goals, that is, to imagine new goals from known ones. So for example, if I know what a cat and a bus are, then I can easily compose the two to generate a new concept, a cat bus, and I can actually very easily picture what it will look like in my mind. And so if you're interested to know more about these inspirations, I recommend to check out our recent blog post on this topic. So inspired by this series, we have recently introduced the Imagine architecture, which is an intrinsically motivated learning architecture that leverages natural language interaction with a social partner to explore procedurally generated scenes and interact with objects. So the agent operates in an environment that is procedurally generated at each episode, with many types of objects that vary in color and shapes, and various types of compositional dynamics. For example, animals can be grown if one brings them food or water, but plants can only be grown with water. And so during the first phase, the agent initially tries random things, and there is a social peer providing linguistic descriptions of what he did in an episode. And the agent is going to learn the meaning of these descriptions and reuse them as its own goals in the next episode. So then comes the most interesting part. After the first phase, there is now an autonomous exploration phase in which the social peer does not speak anymore. So here, the agent continues to sample goals as sentences already uttered by the social peer and training on how to achieve these goals. But most importantly, the agent now invents new out-of-distribution goals by recombining words to form new sentences, modeling their meaning using the learned goal achievement function and using this internal reward function to train the policy to achieve these new goals out of distribution. So to evaluate Church mechanisms for out of distribution language goal imagination, we have made a series of experiments, and they study the capacity of the agent to achieve test goals from a test set which were never uttered by the social peer. And so we have also compared the properties of various goal imagination techniques, showing the robustness of the approach. We have studied in detail how it can both differentially various types of linguistic generalization. And centrally, we also have a matrix of exploration showing how this form of goal imagination enables creative discoveries. And we have finally some fun qualitative analysis, like seeing an agent imagining the goal of growing a plant, that is a goal never uttered by the social peer, and then first trying to do it by giving food to the plant, because its policy generalizes the strategy for growing animals. But then the learned goal achievement function sees that this doesn't work, and it self-supervises in order to adapt to the right behavior, which is here bringing water to the plant. So this experiment shows how language, once invented, provides a powerful cognitive tool for imagining out-of-distribution goals and enabling open-ended creative innovation. And so in a sense, Imagine provides a computational evidence of a statement from Daniel Dore, which summarizes well the main idea. First, we invented language, then language changes. And it changes by many aspects, but we have here focused on compositional imagination, enabling open-ended creative innovation. Okay, so now to conclude more generally on the two experiments I have presented, we have seen that developmental structures in these models are neither learned tabula rasa, nor a predetermined result of an innate program. Instead, they self-organize out of the dynamic interaction between constrained cognitive mechanisms the morphological properties of the body, and the physical and social environment. And so as a general conclusion, I'd like now to propose a possible integration of these developmental processes within the higher level EvoEco framework I have presented at the beginning. So we call that the framework considers environmental complexity as the main driver of behavioral diversity in the human species, based on evidence from paleoclimatology and human behavioral ecology that early humans might have been exposed to particularly chaotic environmental conditions. And so these challenging conditions might have bootstrapped the evolution of an intrinsic motivation to learn that can be explained because it maximizes long-term evolutionary fitness under rapidly changing environmental conditions. Then, as we have seen with the first experiment on the self-organization of vocal development, such exploration mechanisms can spontaneously discover some forms of human language, independently of any functional pressure to communicate. And so obviously, there is still a long way to go from the spontaneous discovery of complex vocal signals to the formation of a compositional language. But as we have seen in the second experiment, once language has emerged, it can then have strong feedback effects on an agent's cognitive abilities. And in particular, it enables open-ended creative innovation. This, in turn, opens the way towards the formation of a cultural repertoire, creating a positive feedback loop to environmental variability, potentially driving the ever-expanding complexity of human ecology. And so if you are interested in this topic and looking for a PhD position, you can drop me an email because I received the funding for it. And yeah, that's it for today. So thank you for your attention. And also I want to thank some of my collaborators on the two experiments I have presented, and also the conceptual framework. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the inspiring talk. And I see that we have already a question from Iris Parent. So we can ask a question now.
Yeah, hi, thank you for this super interesting and provocative talk. So I think we all, I wanted to refer to specifically your account of language. So I think we are all in agreement that language learning starts with some constraints, but I wanted to push back a little on the nature of those constraints that you hypothesize, and in particular, to the claim that language structure arises from sensory, motor, and social interactions. So basically, language is about talking, hearing, and interacting with others. And I want to make a nuanced claim here. So I am not denying the role of sensory motor interactions and the role. Certainly in some areas of speech perception, such as phonetic categorization, there is very strong evidence from neuroimaging and TMS to suggest that they do. But I want to present a more nuanced claim that when it comes to language structure and phonology, then this does not demonstrably arise from those constraints. And the first is we have published in PNS a paper that shows that syllable structure is impervious to transcranial magnetic stimulation of the motor system. We have shown that such knowledge arises in newborns well before they talk. And third, we've showed that knowledge that one has about the phonology of the spoken language spontaneously transferred to sign. That is all of them are actually 3 PNS papers. So I'm interested in your reaction, and thanks again for this interesting discussion.
Yeah, I think we agree that it's not about which processes is the most important, but it's more about figuring out what is the family of processes that can act on the system and influence, for example, the discovery of phonological categories or the syllabic structure of speech. And so of course, I'm not denying, for example, the fact of, let's say, some sort of innate abilities, for example, in phonology or in other fields. But the experiments I have shown today, especially the first one, just demonstrate that if you provide a vocal agent with an intrinsic motivation to learn how to control its vocal apparatus, and actually if you provide this agent with just a general intrinsic motivation to control its body, it will then naturally converge toward exploring all these vocal capacities, from the most simple to the most complex. And this induced trajectory will be attracted toward the production of syllables at the end. And so the hypothesis here is just that this can be one of the forces that act on development and in speech acquisition. So this is at the developmental level. But also a second part of the argument is that this could also have played a role in evolution, in the sense that a complex vocal signaling could first emerge just from pure exploration and then later on be recruited for communicative functions. So that was the structure of the argument here.
So I think it's an interesting challenge. I'm totally with you that the motor system definitely shapes the structure of phonology in evolutionary time course, and that it contributes to learning. Whether it's necessary in online processing is, I guess that's the challenge. So thanks for opening this debate.
Thank you.
And we have a question from Mateusz.
Yes, thank you very much for a fascinating talk. I have a question. So at the beginning, you show us this table, and there is this claim, actually, this kind of widely assumed that in a fully predictable environment, I mean, predictable between generations, there is no point of making behaviors dependent on experience, because when every generation can encounter the same experience, maybe it doesn't make really sense to make the behavior learned, and it should be innate because it's assumed that there is some cost related to learning. And in fact, so it's explained that I often repeat it, but we can actually think about what Gregory showed us. That, for example, we have those birds that recognize their mother's calls, and even though they basically do that in every generation, they should be able to find their mothers. And in every generation, the environment looks the same, so it's fully predictable. Anyway, they somehow have to learn that behavior, so they learn it by just listening to themselves. But also, I know that there are like studies showing, if you, for example, select fruit flies, you teach them some kind of associative learning task, and in every generation, the task is basically the same. And even after hundreds of generations, even though the environment looks basically the same, they still have this ability to learn, and they do not. The behavior doesn't really become independent from experience. So yes, so I wanted to ask, in fact, why do you think is it so? Like, why in that fully predictable environment that is fully predictable between generations, you still observe learning, even if it's assumed that it's costly and shouldn't actually happen?
Yeah. Well, I think there are two things. The first one is.
I cannot hear you.
Can you hear me?
Sorry.
Yeah, maybe two parts in this. The first one will be: is the environment really totally predictable across generation, knowing that these birds seem to have to learn songs from their parents, and is well possible that there is a shift from generation to generation, and so there needs some adaptation. But I have actually no idea about this, but this could be a possibility. And the second one is it, well, what is the part of what we call learning in this adaptation? And are there maybe other processes that can act as an attractor towards this type of developmental trajectories that are maybe not totally related to learning? But in any case, learning has to be understood as a trade-off between cost and benefits. And so if we observe that these birds are indeed learning, then we need to find what are the cost-benefit balance for this learning to occur. But I don't have a lot of background in this area, so I couldn't say a lot more about it.
I think, thank you very much.